Right now, I'm standing underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, inside of a Civil War fort? And if, like me, you're a bit confused, don't worry. I can explain everything. This is Fourth Place, your place to learn about US geography, urbanism, transportation, and city planning. California is, well, let's just say different from the rest of the western US. It's the largest western state by far and loaded with history, especially in the city of San Francisco, which you can see on everything from their many historic landmarks, to the city's urban fabric, to even their increasingly cutting-edge modes of transportation. So it's no wonder why a city filled with Victorian-era architecture is also packed with Victorian-era American war history. To think California played a part in the Civil War is just kinda odd. This was, of course, a war fought between the Union in the North and the Confederates in the South, but many people tend to forget that during the time of Abe Lincoln's first electoral victory in 1860, California and Oregon were, in fact, fully incorporated states, and, as you can deduce by their voting for Lincoln, were heavily allied with the Union during the Civil War. In fact, California played a crucial role in the Civil War, primarily in terms of economic resources, politics, and military contributions rather than direct battles. But most notably, California helped the Union in the war effort with its healthy supply of gold, as the Civil War started mere years after the California Gold Rush. While no major battles occurred in California, the state itself was extremely divided. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 was a catalyst for the start of the Civil War, and looking at how California voted can give us a lot of insight into just how divided the state was, and why San Francisco, a Republican stronghold, was more pro-Union than the heavily Democrat Los Angeles and Southern California. This fact meant that the people of San Francisco were a bit concerned that they may one day be invaded by Confederate sympathizers or even soldiers. So the people of the Bay Area thought it critical to construct and supply fortifications. Which brings me back here, to Fort Point. Constructed between 1853 and 1861 as a part of a string of coastal fortifications, the fort was designed to protect the San Francisco Bay, a crucial hub for commerce and military operations. The fort was modeled after European military architecture, featuring multi-tiered brick walls up to 7 feet thick to withstand cannon fire. I explored the National Historic Site in depth on my recent visit to the city, and it's honestly quite shocking to see how well this thing has withstood the test of time, especially considering its location on the water and the fact that the Golden Gate Bridge was constructed literally on top of it. Upon walking through the entry gates of the structure, you'll be met with a grand and impressive inner ward made up of weathered brick and stone, with iron rail trimmings all throughout. The bottom floor is made up of mostly exhibits featuring artifacts and history, but as you move up the stairs, you can find everything from soldiers' quarters to cannon decks. Every section of the fort was something new to explore, with each vantage point offering a different perspective of not only the inside, but the gorgeous landscapes too. You may have already figured this out by now, but Fort Point actually predates the Golden Gate Bridge by decades, making for an awesome historical juxtaposition. By the time of its completion, advancements in artillery had already rendered brick fortifications somewhat obsolete, but nevertheless, Fort Point was garrisoned by Union troops under the command of Major J.C. Pelton. The fort's primary role was deterrence, ensuring that federal privateers or foreign naval powers didn't attempt to seize the bay. But no direct military engagements took place at the fort, and its cannons were never fired in combat. Another Civil War-era fort that can be found within Fort Point's background is Fort Mason, then known as Black Point. In 1863, the U.S. Army constructed the Black Point Battery at Point San Jose to protect the city's valuable gold reserves from potential Confederate naval threats. The establishment of the battery led to the displacement of some local residents, as the military took control of the once residential area to fortify the harbor against possible attacks. Today, the military grounds, barracks, and fortifications in Fort Mason have become a place for social gathering, especially on Saturday farmers market days, where you can find everything from curious eats, to curious seagulls, to curious yellow labs. Not all the residents were originally kicked out, though, and some descendants of those residents are still living at Fort Mason today in some Victorian-era houses. And it was at Fort Mason where I spotted perhaps one of California's most infamous Civil War-era fortifications. During the Civil War, Fort Alcatraz served as a key military installation for the Union Army, primarily functioning as a coastal defense post and military prison. The U.S. Army had begun fortifying the island in 1853, just 2 years before the Civil War. By the time the war erupted in 1861, Alcatraz was one of the most heavily armed fortifications on the West Coast, with over 100 cannons positioned to protect San Francisco from potential Confederate naval threats or privateer attacks. Beyond its defensive function, Alcatraz became a military prison, housing Confederate sympathizers, deserters, and political prisoners accused of disloyalty to the Union, foreshadowing its later use as a federal penitentiary in the 20th century. Back on the mainland, at one of San Francisco's most famous recreation areas today, was once the home of many a Civil War soldier. The Presidio of San Francisco served as a recruitment and training center for Union troops, particularly the California Volunteers, who were deployed to suppress Confederate activity in the Southwest and guard overland routes. But San Francisco wasn't the only California city involved in the war. During the time, Los Angeles was a remote and largely pro-Southern town within the Union-controlled state. The city had a significant population of Confederate sympathizers, including former Southern migrants and secessionist-leaning residents. While California officially remained in the Union, LA saw efforts to recruit men for the Confederate cause, though they were largely suppressed by Union authorities. This is largely because the city was under the watch of federal troops stationed at the Drum Barracks in nearby Wilmington, which acted as a strategic military post established to prevent Confederate uprisings and secure Southern California's ports. Today, it's really the only surviving military relic of the time, now situated in the middle of a suburban neighborhood and acting as Los Angeles' only Civil War museum. So yeah, California was involved in the US Civil War. Would the Union have even won if it weren't for California's gold supply? How different would Los Angeles and San Francisco look if the Confederates did in fact invade and occupy those regions and their gold supplies? Leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. But for now, I'll see you next week from 4th Place.